The Ring of Fire is the name given to a massive planned chromite mining and smelting development project in the mineral-rich James Bay Lowlands of northern Ontario. The Ring of Fire development would impact 9 First Nations, and potential developers are required to negotiate an impact benefit agreement with these communities prior to development. The region is centered on McFaulds Lake, near the Attawapiskat River in Kenora District, approximately 400 kilometres northeast of Thunder Bay, about 70 kilometres east of Webequie, and due north of Marten Falls and Ogoki Post, which is near on the west of James Bay. The Ring of Fire was named when the first significant mineral finds were made in the region, by Richard Nemis, after Johnny Cash's famous country and western ballad. Nemis, the founder and president of Noront Resources, was a lifelong fan of the singer. By the fall of 2011, the Ring of Fire was considered one of the largest potential mineral reserves in Ontario, with more than 35 junior and intermediate mining and exploration companies covering an area of approximately 1.5 million hectares. Although the Ring of Fire crescent covers 5,000 square kilometres, most discoveries made by 2012 were within a small, 20 kilometres long strip. Ontario's Minister of Northern Development, Mines and Forestry Michael Gravelle called the region home to one of the most promising mineral development opportunities in Ontario in more than a century. Tony Clement, Canada's Treasury Board President and the FedNor Minister responsible for the Ring of Fire, claimed it will be the economic equivalent of the Athabasca oil sands, with a potential of generating $120 billion. Clement says the Ring of Fire represents a once-in-a-life opportunity to create jobs and generate growth and long-term prosperity for Northern Ontario and the nation. Challenges facing the development of the Ring of Fire mineral include lack of access to the remote region, infrastructure deficits such as roads, railway, electricity and broadband, First Nations land rights, and environmental issues in the James Bay Lowlands, the third largest wetland in the world. Clement was looking to business, not the federal government, to invest in power and transportation infrastructure to develop the deposit. Ring of Fire as Ontario's oil sands. In May 2012, Cliffs Natural Resources announced a $3.3 billion investment to build a chromite mine, transportation corridor and processing facility in northern Ontario's Ring of Fire that would lead to a new generation of prosperity in the north, with thousands of jobs and new infrastructure. Natural Resources Minister Michael Gravelle announced that the smelter would be in Sudbury, Ontario. On April 26, 2013, Tony Clement called the Ring of Fire the oil sands of Ontario. On June 13, 2013, Cliffs announced it would put its $3.3 billion project on hold pending results of negotiations between First Nations and Queen's Park. Tony Clement said that the Ring of Fire would bring about 100 years of mining activity that will spin off jobs and economic activity for generations. Access. In February 2013, KWG Resources, a Toronto-based junior miner, released the report it commissioned by the international engineering firm Tetra Tech regarding the viability of building a railroad, instead of a road, to access chromite in the Ring of Fire. KWG's 100% owned subsidiary, Canada Chrome Corporation, staked a 330-kilometre-long string of mining claims creating a transportation corridor linking Cliffs KWG's Big Daddy chromite deposit to CN Rail near Nakina, Ontario. According to KWG, their subsidiary, Canada Chrome Corporation conducted a $15 million surveying and soil testing program for the engineering and construction of a railroad to the Ring of Fire from Exton, Ontario. Mo Laven, VP of KWG Resources, a former Ontario Geological Survey geologist, hopes the federal government will consider Tetra Tech's findings. Cliffs Natural Resources is seeking an easement through Ontario's Mining and Landings Commissioner on the KWG corridor to build their access road. Environmental assessments. In 2011, environmental assessments by the Canadian federal and Ontario provincial governments began for Cliffs Natural Resources' proposed Black Thor project and Noront Resources' unregistered trademark Eagle's Nest project, with both companies volunteering to make their projects subject to an environmental assessment under the Ontario Environmental Assessment Act and are completing environmental assessments under the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act. Natural Resources Development. On October 25, 2010, the Government of Ontario's Far North Act received assent and became law. The Far North Act is an act with respect to land use planning and protection in the Far North, providing a legislative foundation to support Far North land use planning as a joint process between First Nations and Ontario. Ontario's Ministry of Natural Resources Ontario developed the Far North Land Use Planning Initiative, recognizing the Far North of Ontario represents 42% of provincial land area. The Hudson Bay Lowlands is the third largest wetland in the world. Two-thirds of the Hudson Bay Lowlands is peatland, making it the second largest area of contiguous peatland in the world. There are 24,000 First Nation residents in 34 communities. The forests and peatlands in the Far North store 97 billion tons of carbon. The area filters Ontario's air, absorbing 12.5 million tons of carbon dioxide. Government of Canada. On November 12, 2012, Tony Clement was appointed as the lead federal minister on the Ring of Fire and co-chair, with Minister of Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development Bernard Valcourt, of the Federal Steering Committee, which represents 15 federal departments. Clement invited Ontario Natural Resources Minister Michael Gravelle to collaborate on projects, community visits, information sharing, and to hold joint meetings. Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development Canada led other federal departments and FedNor in the development of action plan for supporting community participation in the Ring of Fire to help position First Nations to benefit from proposed mining projects. The Federal Action Plan's whole-of-government approach includes the creation of a one-stop shop, where working group leads, from existing federal working groups in the labor market, infrastructure, community health and well-being, business development and environment, form the single point of contact with local First Nations, industry in the province of Ontario. A multi-ministry meeting of federal senior officials had already been organized in April 2012. Greg Rickford is the MP for the riding of Kenora, where the Ring of Fire is located, and the Minister of State for FedNor. Action Plan for supporting community participation in the Ring of Fire February 2013 briefing notes for Clement warned that the Mattawa First Nation communities were among the most socio-economically challenged in Ontario, impacting their ability to meaningfully participate in large complex projects. Most of the working-age population in the Mattawa First Nation communities have not completed high school. 3 of the 9 local Mattawa First Nations were under financial intervention. Mattawa First Nations lack exposure to a development of this magnitude, combined with low educational attainment and other factors, suggests that the communities do not currently have the capacity to address the various issues related to the Ring of Fire. The action plan noted that First Nations were interested in potential legacy impacts of Ring of Fire infrastructure, such as all-weather roads, links to the power grid and high-speed broadband internet. Industry Canada's Broadband Canada was already laying 2,300 kilometres of fibre optic cable to 26 First Nations across the Far North, including the Ring of Fire. Government of Ontario. In April 2010, the Government of Ontario announced that it would open a large chromite deposit in the area to development. Ring of Fire Secretariat, Resource Revenue Sharing with First Nations . In 2011, Ontario's Ministry of Northern Development and Mines created the Ring of Fire Secretariat, with Christine Casakias as its coordinator, to develop the chromite and other deposits in the Ring of Fire as quickly as possible and with due regard to environmental impacts and the needs of the Aboriginal communities within the region. It outlined strategies regarding First Nations partnerships, including resource revenue sharing, regional infrastructure planning, long-term environmental monitoring, community-based capacity funding, relationship agreements, land use planning, employment and income assistance, skills development, training and job creation, transportation and community infrastructure, and socio-economic and community development in response to concerns by industry and First Nations communities. On May 8, 2012, Premier Dalton McGuinty wrote Prime Minister Stephen Harper, on the eve of Cliffs Natural Resources' announcement of the location of its ferrochrome processing facility, asking for federal government assistance to engage First Nations in the region to help those communities benefit from this historic opportunity. along with federal funds to improve First Nations education on reserves and for drug treatment programs, McGuinty asked for a tripartite process. Development proposals. By 2012, there were 30,000 claims, 35 prospecting companies, and significant discoveries of chromium, copper, zinc, nickel, platinum, vanadium and gold. There were only two major development proposals, Noront Resources' Eagle's Nest project and Cliffs Natural Resources. KWG Resources entered into a joint venture agreement with Bold Ventures on its $5 million Copper Lake project. In February 2013, Richard Nemis, CEO of Bold Ventures, obtained a Marten Falls First Nation land use permit to operate the camp using 3 diamond drills provided by SIR International Drilling and Orbit Garant Drilling to carry out approximately 6,000 meters of diamond drilling on nickel, copper and chromite targets. Operator Bold Ventures was required to cease drilling activities from March 31, 2012, until April 13, 2013, to ensure the First Nations permit was granted under the Mining Act, and a permit issued by a Director of Exploration from the Ministry of Northern Development and Mines was obtained. Probe Mines owned the entire Victory project, which consists of 452 claims totaling 7,232 hectares and covers the interpreted southeast extension of the McFaulds Lake, and the Tamarack project which comprises 360 claims covering over 5,700 hectares of the McFaulds Lake in the Ring of Fire. Noront Resources' Eagle's Nest project. On August 28, 2007, Noront Resources announced the discovery of a large find of high-grade deposit of platinum, palladium, nickel, and copper 500 kilometres northeast of Thunder Bay, Ontario. Its underground mine project is called the Eagle unregistered trademark S-Nest project. To reduce heavy truck traffic, Noront is planning to build a buried 90 kilometres long slurry pipeline, using new technology safety features, from the site to Webequie Junction. Environmental concerns listed in a Lakehead University 2012 report regarding Noront Resources' Eagle's Nest project include pipeline leaks, a large edge effect, a significant loss of biodiversity at local and regional level from linear constructions such as roads. Despite state-of-the-art technology, environmental risks of underground pipelines in the wetlands, excluding the risk of leaks, include alterations of hydrology, thermal regime, soil structure and vegetation of ecosystem. Noront Resources and Marten Falls First Nations, 2003 2010 In 2003, Noront Resources began using 2 frozen lakes Copper Lake, located about 128 kilometers north of Marten Falls, and McFaulds Lake as landing strips without consulting Marten Falls and Webequie First Nations. The Mining Act only allows exploration activities, not the construction of permanent structures. Marten Falls First Nations Chief Eli Muniz explained in 2010 that Noront Resources did not have permits to construct landing strips on the String Bog or roads to the nearby airstrip. The 2 First Nations proposed that they should build and maintain the infrastructure to prevent further damage to the wetlands environment. Marten Falls First Nations Chief Eli Muniz described how over a 7-year period, Noront Resources sunk machines here and they have done outrageous acts here. In the fall of 2009, the companies used a helicopter to break ice here with a log. On February 3, 2010, Noront Resources Limited was trying to build a strip here on the String Bog. In January 2010, Chief Eli Muniz, Webequie Chief Cornelius Wabarsind, and community members set up a blockade on the landing strips at Copper and McFaulds Lakes. Marten Falls and Webequie First Nations ended their blockade on March 19, 2010, with the admonition that they would resume the action if their concerns were not addressed by Noront within 6 months. Although the protest ended, Noront continued to use the frozen lakes as landing strips until breakup in 2010. Chief Eli Muniz expressed environmental concerns over sewage, grey water, oil spills and road clearing over the 7-year period. Cliffs acquires Freeost Resources Canada Black Thor 2009 Cliffs Natural Resources, of Cleveland, Ohio, originally had an ambitious timetable for developing the Black Thor chromite deposit, hoping to complete permits and environmental assessment approvals by the end of 2013. In September 2003, a junior company, Forestry Resources Canada, began exploring Black Thor using airborne geophysics and ground geophysics. In February 2008, findings of a chromite prospect with an estimated 2 kilometres strike length, a depth of 200 meters, and a 40 meters width containing an estimated 72 megatons of chromite ore in September 2009. In October 2009, Noront Resources made a hostile takeover bid for Forestry Resources. In November 2009, Cliffs Natural Resources, the world's largest iron ore pellet supplier, purchased Forestry Resources' share of the chromite-rich high-grade Black Thor, Black Label and Big Daddy deposits in the remote Ring of Fire metals for $240 million. In November 2009, Joseph Caraba, Cliffs president and CEO, claimed the world-class deposits had the potential to support an open-pit mine producing 1 to 2 million tons per year for more than 30 years. Caraba announced that the ore would be further processed into 400,000 to 800,000 tons of ferrochrome. The purchase was finalized in 2010. According to Caraba, the area of the Ring of Fire that Cliffs acquired in 2009 represents one of the premier chromite deposits in the world. Chromite is smelted to produce ferrochrome, which is used globally in the production of stainless steel and is categorized as a strategic metal resource by many countries. In May 2012, Cliffs announced a $3.3 billion investment to build a chromite mine, transportation corridor and processing facility in northern Ontario's Ring of Fire that would lead to a new generation of prosperity in the north, with thousands of jobs and new infrastructure. Cliffs announced that its ferrochrome smelter would be in the Sudbury area in Ontario. However, by June 13, the Cleveland-based Cliffs Natural Resources Incorporated, one of the world unregistered trademark's leading mining companies, announced through Bill Boer, Senior Vice President for Global Ferroalloys, a division of Cliffs, that it would put its $3.3 billion project, including the comprehensive assessment, on hold for 1 year pending results of negotiations between First Nations and Queen's Park. First Nations and the Ring of Fire, Section 35 of the Constitution Act, 1982 forces the two companies to negotiate an impact benefit agreement with the 9 First Nations that would include certain assurances, including guarantees that a certain number of jobs will go to First Nations workers. The 3 First Nations most profoundly impacted by the two projects are Marten Falls First Nation, Webequie First Nation and Niskantaga First Nation. Others on the edge of the Ring of Fire include Constance Lake First Nation, Nibinamik First Nation, Ireland First Nation, Long Lake 58 First Nation, Gina Gaming First Nation, Riobamatoon First Nation, Mishkiagagomin First Nation, and Constance Lake First Nation. In May 2011, Matawa chiefs and their communities called for a joint environmental assessment review panel. On October 13, 2011, the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency proceeded with a comprehensive study environmental assessment that favors the mining industry without First Nations participation. On October 20, 2011, Matawa First Nations removed its support for the Ring of Fire development unless the federal government agreed to a joint review panel environmental assessment process that would allow First Nations communities in the area to have a voice in the assessment. On June 12, 2012, Webequie First Nation Chief Cornelius Warbass and Minister of Northern Development and Mines Rick Bartolucci signed an agreement that commits Ontario to providing social, community and economic development supports for Webequie to help facilitate the community unregistered trademark's involvement in the Ring of Fire. They will work together on regional environmental monitoring and regional infrastructure planning. On February 4, 2013, Tony Clement acknowledged that the 9 First Nations on and off reserve in the Ring of Fire area are some of the most socio-economically disadvantaged communities in all of Canada. In an interview with CBC on June 27, 2013, Les Loutet, the Deputy Grand Chief of the Anishinaabe Nation, the group that represents the 9 First Nations, argued that serious problems have been neglected for decades. 2 to 3 years is not enough time for skills training to train locals for construction jobs, for example. Loutet noted the gap in First Nations high school and post-secondary education that has existed for many years. Anja Jeffrey, Director of the Centre for the North at the Conference Board of Canada, stressed traditional hunting as one of the key issues. Bob Bray was appointed as chief negotiator to represent the 9 different native governments: Marten Falls First Nation, Webequie First Nation, Niskantaga First Nation, Nibinamik First Nation, Araland First Nation, Long Lake 58 First Nation, Gina Gaming First Nation, Riobamatoon First Nation, Mishkiagagoman First Nation, and Constance Lake First Nation. For the Matawa First Nations in talks with the Ontario government about the opening of First Nations lands to the Ring of Fire development. Noront unregistered trademark Eagle's Nest copper and nickel mine and the Blackthor chromite mine of Cliffs Natural Resources would generate wealth and royalties for Ontario, but the mines are in a remote region. They will require significant development to make them viable. Development that will have a profound effect on the local native communities, 5 of which are not yet accessible by road. In 2015, APTN partnered with Mishkeg Media Incorporated and ABF Ring of Fire Incorporated to release a 6-part Ring of Fire TV series and digital media project to help be a source of knowledge and information about the ROF mining development. The digital media project can be accessed at http://ringoffire.car/ and streaming of the episodes can be found at http://ringoffire.car. Royalties. By 2013 to 2014, royalties collected from De Beers Victor diamond mine amounted to $226. At that time De Beers was continuing to pay off its $1 billion investment to build the mine, and from now until it closes, the company expects to pay tens of millions of dollars in royalties. See also, Economic Development First Nations. Notes. References.